Hello, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. I hope you're not ill. I hope that you act. Oh my goodness, there's something talking to me, and I think it's my phone, and I was absolutely certain I had turned the sound off. Sorry about that. I'll just check it. Um, yeah, that's right. I forgot. My phone has, sorry, my hair's feeling all tight and stuck down on my head. Let's just loosen it up a bit so it doesn't feel so uncomfortable. Right. Hi Ken, great to have you here. Everybody, those of you who are new here and those who aren't currently in our chat, we actually have Soft Spoken, which is, I think his actual name is Ken, but there you go. He's another one of the readers in Codex, our group of people who read books online on Twitch. So I'm actually just going to give you a link to one of my panels, isn't there? That's right. I will type it somewhere else because I can do that. And apparently my microphone is working today, so that's good. Codex. There you go. Codex is a group of people who read public domain books online on Twitch. Some of them are like me, where they'll actually transfer their readings over to YouTube. Other ones, oh wonderful, it is Ken, I thought so. Other ones do other stuff as well. I, at this stage, just read books, and I just read children's books. Others read children's books and adults books. Adults books as in ones that aren't specifically aimed at children, not necessarily anything other than that. And there's a really wide range of people there. We're from all over the world. There are a good hefty chunk of people who are from the United States of America, but there are people from other countries as well. There are people from England. There are people from, there's one of them who reads in, I think, Spanish, and I can't remember where they're from. I'm really sorry about that. But they're a great bunch of people. They do all sorts of things aside from just reading books. Some of them do things like teach English and things like that. Other ones are, this is in their world outside of Twitch streaming. Other ones actually read audiobooks as their job. And yet here they are on Twitch reading to us from ones that they're not going to make any money off because they're public domain books. Anyway, so it's lots of fun. I'm going to suggest the link that I just gave you is for, oh yes, it did show up, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting used to having to look over here because I've got a panel missing in front of me. What was I going to say? So the link I gave you just before is for our Discord server, and it's not just for people who read online. It's actually for anyone who wants to enjoy that sort of thing, because we have a book club where we discuss a book that one of us has chosen. It will be a bunch of us who are the readers will actually get together online. I think once a month is what we're working on at the moment, and discuss a portion of that book and read sections of it and things like that, give opinions about it, all sorts of things. But everybody else is willing to, is welcome to join in by actually getting into the chat, such as we do with our normal streams. So that's one of the things we do. There's a bunch of things. I'm fairly new to Codex, so I'm still learning my way around. But also, if you join our Codex Discord, then you will be notified when within our Discord group, you will be notified when any of us go live on Twitch, which is always great to actually know that there's somebody who's currently reading a book and you're interested and you want to go and have a listen. So I was listening to... Who was I listening to earlier on? I was listening to somebody and they were reading The Scarlet Pimpernel. Oh, this is what you're going to learn about me if you're new to my stream. My memory is terrible. To the point where I can get halfway through a sentence while I'm reading it, eyes on the page, and actually forget where I got to. It makes for a lot of fun, actually. We have it's a bit of a scream. I need to get my book back to the page that I'm meant to be going to read soon. I do things a little bit differently to some of them. A lot of them will actually have the book that they're currently reading from on the screen alongside, often it's on the right hand side. So as a viewer, you can, if you're watching on a reasonable sized monitor, you can actually read along with them for yourself, because for some people, they like to see the words that they're hearing, not just hear them. My style of reading tends to be a lot more like story time at home, like bedtime stories, or in junior school where you're all sitting on the mat and the teacher is reading out loud to you. We had a fantastic teacher who read us Charlotte's Web, and it was after lunchtime, so it was a great way to get us to just calm down and be quiet, and a lot more teachable afterwards. We were a lot calmer after she had done this quiet reading session, so she would have us all lying on the floor, on the reading mat, and or sitting at our desks with our heads on our arms and just listening to the story and letting the story flow over us and draw pictures in our minds and stuff like that. It was fabulous. Really, really enjoyed it. I don't know if you remember Charlotte's Web at all, but the ending in its own way is quite sad. And I think for some of us children, it was probably one of the earlier experiences of the fact that you could listen to a story that was absolutely gripping and aimed at the age group that you were, the language that it was using, and yet still have this element of real life, even though it was fantasy, because you have a pig and a spider talking to each other. Sorry, I should have said spoiler alert first, shouldn't I, for those of you who haven't read it, who are talking to each other, and then at the very end of the story, you have this very, very sad realization. But also just this glimmer of hope. And I think for a lot of us as kids listening to the story, it was a new experience to actually realize that you can listen to a great story and still have a sad ending to it, or an ending that's fairly sad with a bit of hope to it. Quite a different accent. Actually it's a Kiwi accent with a lot of English influence to it. So sorry about that. Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for the bits. That's fabulous, Ken. I am thinking I actually need to get myself sorted and do some little replacement icons for some of those extra bits and pieces that happen. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. What am I going to tell you? I'm going to tell you some other things too. I gave you the link for Codex, so that's good. I'm not very good at typing and talking and reading. I'm going to give people a welcome, just for those who are new here. And I will actually speak and give you my welcome for those who are new. And I do a lot of this extra talking even when there isn't anyone here, just because there are also people. Hi, Jonathan, great to have you here. And great, I don't know if you guys know each other. Jonathan is another Kiwi who also reads books. He's reading books that are not fiction. He's reading books that are currently, as far as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan. Actually, I should give you both a shout out, sorry. I will do that after I get the words out if I can. See if that one works. Actually, I'm doing it before. Yes, both the links worked, so they must be the real people. Anyway, so Jonathan plays games, but he also reads texts from old books and letters from the Elizabethan era to do with they are historic pieces, and what he's doing is building up this wealth of knowledge in his own head and taking notes and putting the pieces together for a game idea that he has. And I don't know how far he's through the process, but if you want just a gentle, quiet, somebody reading, even if it's not necessarily fantasy or a novel or something like that, then please do. Go and have a listen to him too, and one of the things that people sometimes forget is it's great to be actually interacting with people when they're live, but don't forget you can also watch their VODs, their videos on demand. So most of us actually have our videos, our live sessions saved, and they are saved by Twitch for about 2 weeks, unless you're a partner, which most of us aren't. I mean, who's going to put the time into it to get to that level and even be as popular? Anyway, let's see if we can actually get reading fun and other categories like that a little bit more popular. Hi Star, great to have you here, and I'm going to give yet another shout out, just because it's good to have other people's links available, and then you can click on them and put them in the background if you, or not even put them in the background, you can actually go and have a look at those. Sorry, I'm not very good at looking at something and typing while I'm actually reading. It looks like it worked. I hope so. Yes, because it's saying what you actually do, which is just chatting. And for Jonathan, it said that Jonathan plays Cold Waters, and it wouldn't do that if I hadn't put the right link, the right name in, would it? Oh, technology, it's great when it works. I'm still figuring out my way around it. Not because I've got grey hair, but just because most of what I do is either fiddling around in the background on my computer, mucking around with photographs that I've taken of the urns that we do. Yes, I know this is all over the place, and I was going to introduce myself to anyone who's new, and I will get back to that. Or keeping the rest of the family's computers going. Well, actually, one of them I don't need to do that for anymore because they're way ahead of me on computing. But yeah, that's often what happens. So back to the codex before I get to some other things. What was I saying about codex? Yeah, so in addition to the Discord server, which I gave you the link for just before, maybe somebody else can put that out. The things like shout out and codex are commands that anyone can use. So you're welcome to put that into the chat while I'm talking if you want, not a problem. But I also have below my video window, which when I'm live, actually it will show you then. Otherwise, go to my About page. There's a section there about Codex, and there's links for all of the streamers that are in Codex. So please go and have a look at them, go and see what they do. A lot of them do things like games and stuff as well. One of the others is Goriki, and he teaches English in Japan. I'm pretty sure that's information that's general public knowledge. He teaches English, and so when he's not in teacher mode part of the year, then he reads books online. The rest of the time, so that's most of the time he's teaching, so he'll do game stuff and chat with other people and stuff like that for part of the year, his work part of the year. But when it is school holiday time, so that is in summer and in the middle of winter, they have their bigger holiday season for school, then he does his reading. So yeah, there's a bunch of us. We do all sorts of things. There's people who do voiceovers. There's people who do voice acting. I think there's people who actually do normal acting as well. I'm not sure. But please come and discover the rest of the group. Good bunch of people, all sorts of stuff. Fabulous. You can actually see how it fits for you. If you're involved with reading public domain stuff, we don't do copyrighted stuff that is still under copyright, because that's effectively you're stealing from somebody when you do that, because you haven't got permission to use their stuff. But stuff that's in public domain is what we are all in favour of doing in this sort of thing. Anyway, right, so hi, if you're new here, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories. Actually, no, I read old children's stories. I need to stop saying old-fashioned, because that sounds like they're stories that, oh yes, if we get the publisher's permission or the author's permission, if we actually have that permission, then yes, we are okay for reading those online. But we need to actually have specific permission before we do that. I do have a couple of books that I would like to do that. They're actually ones where the author is now deceased, but they are still within copyright because of the amount of time copyright lasts for. So I'm in the middle of the process of trying to find out who the copyright holder is. It's quite a challenge. And And you'd think there'd be some central database system for it, but there isn't. Well, not for England, there isn't anyway. And then there are other ones where I know that copyright has expired on them that are written by a New Zealand author, but actually trying to find a digital copy of those books, because I can't find my physical copies of those books at the moment. I don't know if I ever will. I hope I do, because they've got some lovely illustrations in, and then I'll be able to share them with you. And both the illustrations, though that one, the illustrations and the text are actually in public domain. It's just that they're not anywhere online, because New Zealand doesn't have a big pool of population or financial resources to actually put the time into scanning that sort of thing to make it available online. So I don't know what to do about that one. We'll get there. Hopefully I'll be able to find pictures, copies of those books that I can actually share with you. But yeah, if we have specific permission to be able to share them, then we will do so, but otherwise it's public domain books. So yeah, back to who I am. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old children's books. One such as this sort of thing. This book here, I've just dropped three-quarters of my crackers on the floor. So this one here, an actual physical book with a printed front cover with kind of gold in the lettering. No, it doesn't have special fancy marbling on the edges of the pages, but it says on the front cover, inside the front cover, St. Sepulchre's Sunday School, second prize awarded to Lawrence Lord for general work in 8th class. And then it's got the superintendent and the curate's signatures, and it was signed in July 1897. This physical book was given to my great uncle or my great uncle. I can't remember. I haven't got the brain power to actually be able to figure that one out. But it has illustrations along this sort of style where it's done as an etching originally. I'm trying to get it so you can actually see it. It's reasonably clear, not as good as I'd like. Anyway, so it has that style of illustrations in, and because of the era of the book, they often don't actually have when they were printed written on them. They usually have a list of other books that are available that the publisher prints, that the printer prints, and sometimes it's the publishers. I don't know how that works in terms of when it was specifically printed. It would have been before that, because back in those days, a printer would print a batch of books, a reasonable sized batch of books, and then they would go into storage and be sent out to different places to be sold when they were needed by those booksellers. So it was, even when I was a kid, I remember getting books that were brand new. They were a new book, as in it wasn't an old book that had just been hiding in someone's storeroom, and yet the book was actually sort of like 3 or 5 years old if you found the copyright details, which was associated with also when it was printed. So the book that I had in my hands was 3 years old when I got it, and yet it was a brand new book. Because at that stage there was no concept of print on demand, really. And I grew up with a lot of books that were from this sort of an era. Often they were a little bit newer than that. This one says After the End, down in this bit here where it says the end. It's got a line across the bottom of the page, and it says, printed by Gilbert and Rivington Limited, St. John's House, Clerkenwell, which is in London. I'm just going to hop off screen for a moment and pick up these crackers before my chair runs over them. Excuse me, sorry about that. Entertain yourselves for a minute or two. Just chat among yourselves. Those ones are going to have little bits of dust and fluff and stuff like that on them, so I'm not going to be able to eat those ones, am I? Yay, not as many as I thought. Right. So that sort of book is the sort of book that I grew up reading. They were books that my parents and my grandparents had been given as gifts often, or won them as Sunday school prizes or school prizes or whatever like that. And they had been passed down in the family. Not as, oh, this is sacred, you must look after it and pass it on to your children and your children's children, and they must pass it on to their children and their children's children. Not that sort of stuff. But we did have to show respect to books because they cost a lot of money back in the day. Anyway, so it was normal in my family, because we were a family of book readers, to actually pass on books that the parents, the grandparents had read when they were kids, the same age as me. So I grew up reading things like The Fairy Rings by Edith Howes. Now that's a book that I really want to read to you guys, but I don't have a current copy available. I think there's one in the boxes of stuff from my parents' house. I'm hoping so, and when I find it, I will read it to you. In fact, I will probably actually scan the pictures so you can see them better than what I was just showing you by waving that one around. So that's the sort of books I grew up reading, and it's the sort of books that I want to share with other people, because there's something about reading books from a different time and place that helps us to get out of the space that we're currently in and see the world differently. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. Sometimes it's just a nice bit of escapism, and sometimes it's just like, oh, the current state of things in my house or my job or my school or the world in general, the town that I live in, are just, yuck. I don't enjoy it. And sometimes you mentally need to take a break from that. And for me, that's what reading stories is about. It's a great escape. Anyway, so that's what I do. I'm looking around to see if there was something else I was meant to wave at you to do with the books. No, not this time. But for those who are new here, I've got 3 tips. For those who have been here before, you can say it along with me, although I get the words different every time. I have 3 tips. The first tip is make sure you have some water handy, because you need to keep your brain working and your body working. Have another drink as well. It doesn't have to just be water, but if you like water, then water's great. So I always have something, actually I have something like this to drink from, a glass jar with a screw top lid and a straw, but this is actually easier to see and wave at you because it's got a nice sealing lid, and I like the colour. That's the one I started with. So tip number 1 is have something to drink handy. Tip number 2 is have snacks. I've got cheese and crackers. Well, you knew I had crackers because I dropped them on the floor before, but cheese and crackers, and I'm pleased because even though I actually tweaked my green screen system just after the stream last time, it's still not turning my cheese and crackers into green screen background, which is a really weird thing that somehow I managed to discover, that what I thought was sort of like creamy yellow cheese and crackers, actually my computer saw as green screen, even though I'd specifically picked the colour of the screen behind me. And when you're wondering what I'm talking about, I will show you. Filters, turn this one off. So at the moment I've got it set so you can see this background behind me. This picture behind me was taken in 1910 of the street that the children in our story are currently staying at, because they are living with old nurse. So if I do this, that's what's actually behind me, is a green screen. It's actually it's not a bought green screen, it's a bought piece of green felt, which I have hanging over an old, you know, those cheapy metal frames that you can get to use as wardrobes, where it's just like a rack that you can put coat hangers on, that people use when they go flashing and stuff like that. Well, I've just got a broken one of those behind me with a stick to make it long enough, and I have that piece of felt thrown over it. So you don't have to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have a green screen. You can just go to the fabric shop and get some felt. That was the dearest part of it, and throw it over something so it actually works. And the reason I have a green screen instead of a lovely setting with bookshelves and easy chairs and coffee tables and pot plants and stuff like that, which is what I actually really want to do, is because at the moment the space behind me is all storage space. In amongst the stuff behind me are some boxes that have books, but most of the books are in storage elsewhere in the house. But my office space is the main junky storage space for our house, and I still have to get it all sorted out before I can actually get on with having that as my large office space and reading room, and just sort of chill space. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be able to show you. I'll give you a tour of it when we get that done. So that's at some stage. That's ahead of me. Green screen and all that sort of stuff actually isn't as, if you're using a computer, not a phone. I don't know about doing it on a phone, or I don't know how well it works on something like a Mac, but I use a PC. It's not a fancy new one. It's an older one. And I have just a little webcam. The one I've got now actually is way better than it used to be, because I was gifted it. My son won it, and when he was going into the draw for it, because we have a friend who does gaming online, and Logitech actually was sponsoring his anniversary of being online, and one of the things they gifted was a stream cam, and it was available. He was making it available as a prize when he was streaming for his anniversary. My son won it, and before he had won it, when it was still part of the competition, he said, "I'm not likely to use it, but if I did win it, I would give it to Mum," because he plays space flying and shooting style games, and he doesn't actually stream them. He watches a lot of friends streaming, but he knew that it would be something that I could use and appreciate. So that's what I'm doing. So that was information you didn't need, and I'm full of that sort of information. Additional information for those of you who haven't been here when I'm been reading. I've already said that often I get lost when I'm in the middle of reading a sentence. That is courtesy of the fact that I'm as old as I am, and therefore I have a lot of information in my head. It's also courtesy of insomnia and ADHD. It does make for a lot of fun. I am not at all bothered by it. I will sometimes sound slightly frustrated, but I usually think it's hilarious. And also, having grown up reading a lot of things, there's a lot of words that I read out where I will pronounce them the way that I figured out how to say them in the first place when I was a kid, because there's a lot of stuff that there's words that you learn to decode. They don't teach you how to say everything when you're at school, and even then I don't necessarily think that they would have got it all correct, which doesn't actually matter. But there's a lot of stuff that we learn when we are at school from reading lessons and stuff like that that doesn't actually cover the specific words that we need. And so I will actually be saying words that sometimes are quite different to necessarily the way you have learnt to say them. So that's why I have that command there, which you are most welcome to use. And I typed in say, but it's actually pronounced. You can do whichever of those two that you want to. So that's not a problem. I didn't give you the third tip if you're new here. First tip, has something to drink. Second tip, snacks. The third tip is, go on, jump in. Somewhere comfortable to sit. Unless, of course, you're having to work, like doing housework or studying or accounts or something like that, in which case you're here. Me talking is keeping you occupied, keeping your brain occupied while you're keeping your hands busy. So let's get on with reading, hey? Let's do this. Here we go. I'm wondering what else is missing. No, nothing else is missing apart from that one panel, which I will have a fiddle with my overlays later on, after I finish streaming, after I finish reading, and see what I can figure out what's going on. So the story we're reading is the story of the Amulet. It's the third book. 3, it seems to be a magic number today. It's the third book in the Samoyed series by Edith Nesbit. She wrote several series books. So we have already finished the Bastable series, which was the Treasure Seekers, the Would-Be Goods, and New Treasure Seekers. She also wrote books like The Railway Children, which is one of the earlier ones I read. I love that story. It's a story that's been made into children's movies and TV series over in England a number of times. and all of them will have a slightly different take on it, just the way that sort of thing is. And often people will know the stories that way, like some of the other books I've read by other authors. But she seemed to have a knack of creating a family of characters and wanting to explore them further than just what was available in the space of one children's book. And so you get some further adventures with these children. So the Samoyed series seems to be all about children, wishes, and consequences. So the first book in the series is called Five Children and It, and the It in the title is the Samoyed, P-S-A-M-M-E-A-D, and they meet this character, and it is a sand fairy, and it is not a fairy anything like a fairy that you or I have seen. Yes, there was somebody in Codex was actually reading The Railway Children the other day, and I missed them. I was really hoping to actually get to listen. But yes, one of our readers has been reading The Railway Children. There are other people probably also reading them, but I've also seen one of the others a week or two ago, I think it was last week, was reading The Railway Children. I love that story. I thoroughly enjoyed actually getting to read it while we were doing the while I was streaming a while ago. So yeah, really enjoyed it. So this is another one by, this series is by the same author. Now The Railway Children, we were all left hoping for more stories. She didn't give us that. Edith Nesbit did not give us any more stories in the with that family of children, but she did go on and write these other stories with other children. So the Bastables was those other ones that I've talked about. And so this series is the Samoyed series. So this is Five Children in It, the It being the Samoyed or Sand Fairy. And that's one where the children could get 3 wishes per day. 3 or 1? I think it was 3 wishes per day from the Samoyed. And the Samoyed was actually finding it absolutely exhausting because he had been in hibernation for quite a long time, and so most of the wishes he had to deal with were from people who were prehistoric, and they wanted food, so they didn't have to go hunting, which kind of made sense, and it just made you think about things differently. The second book in the series was The Phoenix and the Carpet. Now, the Samoyed was referenced in that book, but never met by the children again. And the phoenix was this phoenix bird, that mythical creature that hatched out of an egg, and the carpet was a wishing carpet, and the two knew each other and would grant wishes, but in a different manner, completely different manner. And then the children ended up wearing out the carpet. So yes, that's one of the things that happened. So that was the end of that series of adventures in that book. And then we've started this one, and at the very end of Five Children and It, the children had promised, and the Samoyed had agreed, that they would not ask the Samoyed for any further wishes. He was not capable of granting them any further wishes. That, I think, had been finished off as a wish that they would not be able to, because they realised it wasn't actually really fair to the Samoyed that they would keep asking things of him, or referenced in the book was it. But we've found this character again, but for some reason the Samoyed actually wants them to have wishes. And so the Samoyed has kind of engineered it that they have found this amulet, and he has promised the children that somehow they are going to be getting some more wishes. Maybe the Samoyed thinks that they need to be learning something from wishes to do with consequences. They're getting better with consequences. Yes, having released a bunch of what they referenced as Red Indians, Native Americans, in the southern English countryside, and it was not lots of fun and games like in their books that they had read as children. It was a real attack on the castle that they were in, and things like that. Anyway, so we're going to read this one and see what happens. So we've had two readings so far. The first one, we hadn't had anything to do with the amulet. It was just about finding the Samoyed. The second reading, we actually found out about the amulet. they discovered what it was, they got it. And they have seen a slight effect of its magical power, but we haven't actually been anywhere with it. Well, I think we are about to. So how about I have a mouthful of water, because I'm getting a bit dry, and we carry on. I haven't yet set up commands for hydrate or anything like that, sorry, but then usually I only stream for an hour or two, so it's not quite so much of a problem. But I will get on to doing the points thing one day. Hopefully. You can all remind me. And there's probably something that'll show you what the commands are that I've got. I haven't got a lot of commands because I don't have games or anything running in stream. But you're most welcome to type in !commands, I think it is, and Stream Elements will tell you what commands I've got. So we'll carry on by reading the book. That's enough talk, I think. Right, The Story of the Amulet by Edith Nesbit, Chapter 4, 8,000 years ago. Next morning, Anthea got Nurse to allow her to take up the poor learned gentleman's breakfast. Now, he's the chap who's living upstairs in this house that old Nurse owns. And turns out he's an Egyptologist, and he knew exactly what was written on this amulet. He did not recognise her at first, but when he did, he was vaguely pleased to see her. "You see, I am wearing the charm around my neck," she said. "I am taking care of it, like you told us to." "That's right," he said. "Did you have a good game last night?" "You will eat your breakfast before it's cold, won't you?" said Anthea. She's the oldest of the girls. I think she's the second oldest of the children. "Yes, we had a splendid time. The charm made it all dark and then greeny light, and then it spoke. Oh, I wish you could have heard it. It was such a darling voice, and it told us the other half of it was lost in the past. So of course we shall have to look for it there." The learned gentleman rubbed his hair with both hands and looked anxiously at Anthea. "I suppose it's natural, youthful imagination and so forth," he said. "Yet someone must have... Who told you that some part of the charm was missing?" "I can't tell you," she said. "I know it seems most awfully rude, especially after being so kind about telling us the name of power and all that, but really I'm not allowed to tell anybody anything about the person who told me. You won't forget your breakfast, will you?" The learned gentleman smiled feebly and then frowned, not a cross frown, but a puzzle frown. "Thank you," he said. "I shall always be pleased if you'll look in any time you're passing, you know, at least." "I will," she said. "Goodbye. I'll always tell you anything I may tell you." He had not had many adventures with children like them, and he wondered whether all children were like these. He spent quite 5 minutes in wondering before he settled down to the 52nd chapter of his great book on the secret rites of the priests of Amun-Ra. There you go. So I think this is a book he's writing. So he's an Egyptologist. He's writing a book about the secret rites of the priests of Amun-Ra. And I'm hoping that it was okay that she told him those things. I'm not quite sure. This is probably me as an adult anticipating possible issues that aren't necessarily there in something that is available in a story to children. We anticipate things a little differently, adults to children. Sorry, I need to have a little bit of something to eat too. Otherwise, you're going to get lots of indigestion burps from me. Right. It's no use to pretend that the children did not feel a good deal of agitation at the thought of going through the charm into the past. That idea that perhaps they might stay in the past and never get back again was anything but pleasing. Yet no one would have dared to suggest that the charm could not be used, and though each was in its heart very frightened indeed, they would all have joined in jeering at the cowardice of any one of them who should have uttered the timid but natural suggestion, "Don't let's." It seemed necessary to make arrangements for being out. For being out all day, for there was no reason to suppose that the sound of the dinner bell would be able to reach them back in the past. And it seemed unwise to excite old nurse's curiosity when nothing they could say, not even the truth, could in any way satisfy it, her curiosity. They were all very proud to think how well they had understood what the charm and the Samoyed had said about time and space, and things like that, and they were perfectly certain that it would be quite impossible to make old nurse understand a single word of it. So they merely asked her to let them take their dinner out into Regent's Park, and this, with the implied cold mutton and tomatoes, was readily granted. So that's the sort of picnic lunch she would have provided them. "You can get yourselves some buns or sponge cakes or whatever you fancy like," said old nurse, giving Cyril a shilling. And they call her old nurse because she used to look after them when they were younger at wherever it was that they were living at the time, but she hasn't done for some time. And she's able to look after the children while their father is away in Manchuria reporting on the war over there. For the newspaper he works for, and mother is in Madeira having a rest break because she has not been well. I wonder why. I think they're a little bit intense for her at times, especially if she's having to look after them and be in charge of everything. They do get into a bit of trouble. "Don't go getting jam tarts now, so messy at the best of times, and without forks and plates, ruination on your clothes, besides your not being able to wash your hands and faces afterwards, because you're out." So Cyril took the shilling and they all started off. They went round by the Tottenham Court Road to buy a piece of waterproof sheeting to put over the Samoyed in case it should be raining in the past when they got there. He's kind of allergic to rain. It stops things working properly for him. I think it makes him very ill and may actually kill him. Water, this is. "For it is almost certain death." I should have just kept reading. "It is almost certain death to a Samoyed to get wet." The sun was shining very brightly and even London looked pretty. Women were selling roses from big baskets full, and Anthea bought 4 roses, 1 each, for herself and the others. They were red roses and smelt of summer, the kind of roses you always want so desperately at about Christmas time, when you can only get mistletoe, which is pale right through to its very scent, and holly, which pricks your nose if you try to smell it. So now everyone had a rose in its buttonhole, and soon everyone was sitting on the grass in Regent's Park, under trees whose leaves would have been clean, clear green in the country, but here were dusty and yellowish and brown at the edges because they're in the city. "We've got to go on with it," said Anthea, "and as the eldest has to go first, you'll have to be last, Jane. You quite understand about holding on to the charm as you go through, don't you, Puss?" "I wish I hadn't got to be last," said Jane. "You shall carry the Samoyed if you like," said Anthea. "That is," she added, remembering the beast's queer temper, "if it'll let you." The Samoyed, however, was unexpectedly amiable. I'm still wondering what it gains by this. I'm sure that there's something else going on that the Samoyed is angling for, so to speak. "I don't mind," it said. "Who carries me? So long as it doesn't drop me. I can't bear being dropped." Jane, with trembling hands, took the Samoyed and its fish basket under one arm. The charm's long string was hung around her neck. Then they all stood up. Jane held out the charm at arm's length, and Cyril solemnly pronounced the word of power. As he spoke it, the charm grew tall and broad, and he saw that Jane was holding on to the edge of a great red arch of very curious shape. The opening of the arch was small, but Cyril saw that he could go through it. All round and beyond the arch were the faded trees and trampled grass of Regent's Park, where the little ragged children were playing ring-a-rosies, but through the opening of it shone a blaze of blue and yellow and red. Cyril drew a long breath and stiffened his legs so that the others should not see that his knees were trembling and almost knocking together. "Here goes," he said. I'm just seeing if this picture is ready for you. There you go. "Here goes," he said, and then stepping up through the arch, disappeared. Then followed Anthea. Robert, coming next, held fast at Anthea's suggestion to the sleeve of Jane, who was thus dragged safely through the arch, because Jane is quite a bit younger than the oldest ones in some ways. So this is Anthea, this is Cyril, this is Jane, and this is Robert. So Jane's the one who's the youngest, and so therefore just you can tell her something, but she's not necessarily going to stay focused on that. And if something scares her, she's likely to drop it or let go or whatever. And none of them want that to happen because they don't want to be stuck in the past. So we'll carry on. So this is the amulet. The amulet originally was about something the size of something that would fit in your hand. And it has, when they said this magic word of power, it grew so the top of it is poking out of ground level, I think, so they go through the central piece here. There you go. And I am going to, move that out of the way. I'm going to turn off the picture and find the next one just because I know there's another picture coming so that I'm ready for it. And then, when we get to that part of the next stage of the story, I'll be able to show it to you, won't I? And it's a little bit hard because the copy of the digital book that I'm reading doesn't have the same illustrations as the ones that I'm showing you. So they're not in the same place in the story, and I have to try and remember what they are. Right. I'm just going to open up my Windows Explorer to the right place, and then I haven't got used to yet dragging something across to my other monitor and being able to just take it across. Apparently it likes to hit the edge and then I have to do it a second time. Otherwise it tries to do the whole sort of like things arranged on one monitor. Still learning. I think it's in a more recent update than when I was first learning about how this particular computer system works. I was on Windows 95 for a very long time. Yes, and then Vista. I'm very good at not very good. I seem to because finances are not a big thing in my family, not a priority. Keeping computers going for longer than a lot of other people would, because most other people will get nice new fancy go fast hardware. It seems to be a thing that we do anyway. So that's why it's a delight to actually have the camera that I've got, because it actually responds, like it will focus on, it should do. Come on, focus. Come on. It's kind of focusing on my hand, and then it refocuses on my face. So there you go. And I love that because the other one didn't. Anyway, we'll carry on. So Robert, coming next, held fast at Anthea's suggestion to the sleeve of Jane, who was thus dragged safely through the arch. And as soon as they were on the other side of the arch, there was no more arch at all. And no more Regent's Park either, only the charm in Jane's hand, and it was the proper size again. They were now in a light so bright that they winked and blinked and rubbed their eyes. During this dazzling interval, Anthea felt for the charm and pushed it inside Jane's frock so that it might be quite safe, hiding it inside her clothing. That's why it's on a longer string as well. When their eyes got used to the new wonderful light, the children looked round them. The sky was very, very blue, and it sparkled and glittered and dazzled like the sea at home when the sun shines on it. The sea at home, I think, must mean that they are now living down on the south coast or somewhere like that, because on a really sunny day in England, it can be very very blue and green, the countryside. But when you're in the city, it tended to be a lot more grey because of smoke from fireplaces and traffic and all sorts of things like this, and dust from the roads and all sorts of things like that. Also, I think they've gone somewhere that's a lot hotter, and often if you go somewhere that's not a big city but is a lot hotter, the colours are a lot either washed out because the sun is so bright and your eyes are not coping well with it, or they're very, very intense compared with the gentle light of the English countryside, unless it's the middle of a really hot summer. Having lived in lots of different places, yeah, it can be quite different between them. So we'll carry on. I'm sure they're going to explain it to us. The sky was very, very blue, and it sparkled and glittered and dazzled like the sea at home when the sun shines on it. They were standing on a little clearing in a thick, low forest. There were trees and shrubs and a close, just checking that my iPad's actually charging just as well, and a close, thorny, tangly undergrowth. In front of them stretched a bank of strange black mud. Then came the browny, yellowy, shining ribbon of a river, then more dry, caked mud and more greeny, browny jungle. The only things that told that human people had been there was the clearing, a path that led to it, and an odd arrangement of cut reeds in the river. They looked at each other. "Well," said Robert, "this is a change of air." It was. The air was hotter than they could have imagined, even in London in August. So August is the peak of summer, and being in the city where you've got these buildings close by and hard surfaces, it can get really hot and muggy, but it's a different sort of hot to where they are. So it was hotter than they could have imagined, even in London in August. "I wish I knew where we were," said Cyril. Here's a river. Now I wonder whether it's the Amazon or the Tiber or what." "It's the Nile," said the Samoyed, looking out of the fish bag. "Then this is Egypt," said Robert, who had once taken a geography prize. Answered a quiz or an exam or something like that and done really well. "I don't see any crocodiles," Cyril objected. His prize had been for natural history. The Samoyed reached out a hairy arm from its basket and pointed to a heap of mud at the edge of the water. "What do you call that?" it said, and as it spoke, the heap of mud slid into the river just as a slab of damp mixed mortar will slip from a bricklayer's trowel. They lie on the river banks, and so therefore they are probably a little bit muddy, not just like we see in pictures, especially for the children. They would have been line drawings. "Oh," said everybody. There was a crashing among the reeds on the other side of the river. "And there's a river horse," said the Samoyed, as a great beast like an enormous slaty blue slug showed itself against the black bank on the far side of the stream. "It's a hippopotamus," said Cyril. "It seems much more real somehow than the one at the zoo, doesn't it?" Did you know that hippopotamus are apparently related to horses? There you go. You can look that one up. Right. "It's a hippopotamus," said Cyril. "It seems so much more real somehow than the one at the zoo, doesn't it?" "I'm glad it's being real on the other side of the river," said Jane. And now there was a crackling of reeds and twigs behind them. This was horrible. Of course, it might be another hippopotamus, or a crocodile, or a lion, or in fact almost anything. "Keep your hand on the charm, Jane," said Robert hastily. "We ought to have a means of escape handy. I'm dead certain this is the sort of place where simply anything might happen to us." Yes, hippos are very aggressive and dangerous, and they have now recognised that hippos kill more people in Africa than any of the carnivorous animals. Hippopotamus are herbivores. They can move fast. They are very heavy. They have very large mouths with enormous teeth. Not a lot of them, and they can bite hard, and they can knock you over, and they can stamp on you. although I don't know if quite all of that information was available at the time that the author was writing this. I do believe that people had experienced them enough to know that they could be a bit dangerous, but I don't think they realised just how dangerous they could be. Anyway, we're going to carry on reading. And thank you for that information. That's actually worth having and being reminded of, so I can let the others know too. Part of the reason sometimes that I will read out comments while I'm live on Twitch is because not everybody who's going to be watching this video afterwards is going to be on Twitch, so they're not going to see this chat that's over here. Some of the people who view my videos are over on YouTube, and if you want to, you can actually go, preferably not now when I'm reading, because I'd hate to see you go. You can actually go to my YouTube channel and have a listen to the other stories we've read, like Catching Up with 5 Children and It, and The Phoenix and the Carpet. They're all there as playlists, the different books that I've read previously. Anyway, we're going to carry on with the hippopotamus and see what it is that's rattling in the reeds behind them and the bush behind them. I'm dead certain this is the sort of place where anything might happen to us. I believe a hippopotamus is going to happen to us, said Jane. A very, very big one. They had all turned to face the danger. Don't be silly little duffers, said the Samoyed in its friendly, informal way. It's not a river horse, it's a human. It was a girl of about Anthea's age. Her hair was short and fair, though her skin was tanned by the sun, and you could see that it would have been fair too if it had had a chance. She had every chance of being tanned, for she had no clothes to speak of, and the 4 English children, carefully dressed in frocks, hats, shoes, stockings, coats, collars, and all the rest of it, envied her more than any words of theirs or of mine could possibly say, because they're in this really hot climate in Egypt. Nothing like what you dress for in London. There was no doubt that here was the right costume for that climate. She carried a pot on her head of black and red earthenware. She did not see the children, who shrank back against the edge of the jungle, and she went forward to the brink of the river to fill her pitcher. As she went, she made a strange sort of droning, humming, melancholy noise, all on 2 notes. Anthea could not help thinking that perhaps the girl thought this noise was singing. The girl filled the pitcher and set it down by the river bank. Then she waded into the water and stooped over the circle of cut reeds. She pulled 6 fine fish out of the water within the reeds, killing each as she took it out and threading it on a long osier that she carried. An osier is a willow strand, branch, twitch thing. Twitch as in flicking thing. Twitch was a word long before the streaming service. Willows have really long, thin branches, sort of like about this sort of thickness, that they shoot out, and they're used for weaving baskets and things like that, but they're also used for a whole lot of, itchy ear, and I often itch my ears at you anyway. Just ignore it, or itch your own ear if it helps you feel better. So one of the uses was obviously for threading things onto. So that's what she's doing, is she's threading these fish onto the osier, O-S-I-E-R, in case you want to look it up. There you go. Threading it onto a long osier that she carried. Then she knotted the osier, hung it on her arm, picked up the pitcher and turned to come back. And as she turned, she saw the 4 children. The white dresses of Jane and Anthea stood out like snow against the dark forest background. She screamed, and the pitcher fell, and the water was spilled out over the hard mud surface, and over the fish, which had fallen too. Then the water slowly trickled away into the deep cracks. "Don't be frightened," Anthea cried. "We won't hurt you." "Who are you?" said the girl. "Now, once for all, I am not going to be bothered to tell you how it was that the girl could understand Anthea and Anthea could understand the girl. You, at any rate, would not understand me if I tried to explain it, any more than you can understand about time and space being only forms of thought. You may think what you like, Perhaps the children had found out the universal language which everyone can understand, and which wise men so far have not found. You will have noticed long ago that they were singularly lucky children, and they may have had this piece of luck as well as others, or it may have been that, but why pursue the question further? The fact remains that in all their adventures, the muddle-headed inventions which we call foreign languages never bothered them in the least. They could always understand and be understood. If you can explain this, please do. I dare say I could understand your explanation, though you could never understand mine. So, when the girl said, "Who are you?" everyone understood at once, and Anthea replied, "We are children, just like you." "Don't be frightened. Won't you show us where you live?" Jane put her face right into the Samoyed's basket and burrowed her mouth into its fur to whisper, "Is it safe? Won't they eat us? Are they cannibals?" The Samoyed shrugged its fur. "Don't make your voice buzz like that. It tickles my ears," it said rather crossly. "You can always get back to Regent's Park in time if you keep fast hold of the charm," it said. The strange girl was trembling with fright. Anthea had a bangle on her arm. It was a 7-pence halfpenny trumpery thing. That means it was like a cheap bit of stuff. Probably the sort of stuff that we would get now from a Dollar Tree or Dollar Shop or a gold coin store or something like that. It was a 7-penny halfpenny trumpery thing that pretended to be silver. It had a glass heart of turquoise blue hanging from it, and it was the gift of the maid of all work at the Fitzroy Street house. "Here," said Anthea, "this is for you. This is to show we will not hurt you, and if you take it, I shall know that you won't hurt us." And I think that you'll find that's right there. She's giving it. Anthea is giving it to the girl. And the artist has given her a little bit of clothing, a loincloth, because that would have, in the day and age that this was written, that would have been considered no clothes at all, actually. Yep. So, carrying on. The girl held out her hand. Anthea slid the bangle over it, and the girl's face lighted up with the joy of possession. "Come," she said, looking lovingly at the bangle. "It is peace between your house and mine." She picked up her fish and pitcher, I'm guessing she refilled it, and led the way up the narrow path by which she had come, and the others followed. "This is something like," said Cyril, trying to be brave. "Yes," said Robert, also assuming a boldness he was far from feeling. "This really and truly is an adventure. It is being in the past makes it quite different from the Phoenix and Carpet happenings." The belt of thick-growing acacia trees and shrubs, mostly prickly and unpleasant-looking, seemed about half a mile across. The path was narrow and the wood dark. At last, ahead, daylight shone through the boughs and leaves. The whole party suddenly came out of the wood's shadow into the glare of the sunlight that shone on a great stretch of yellow sand dotted with heaps of grey rocks, where spiky cactus plants showed gaudy crimson and pink flowers among their shabby sand-peppered leaves. Now, I have no idea if that actually is the sort of plants that would have been there. Maybe you know. I haven't a clue. I don't know how accurate this description of the flora and fauna of the area in the story are. I do know that the author spent quite a lot of time at the British Museum talking with the chap who the book is dedicated to, and he had spent quite a lot of time in Egypt, from what I understand. So hopefully it's accurate, but I don't know that it is because I was not aware of cactuses in Egypt. But then this is meant to be set way, way, way in the past, so you never know. We'll find out. And I now have to find the place on the page. The plants showed gaudy crimson and pink flowers among their shabby, sand-peppered leaves. Away to the right was something that looked like a grey-brown hedge, and from beyond it, blue smoke went up to the bluer sky, and over all the sun shone till you could hardly bear your clothes. "This is where I live," said the girl, pointing. I won't go, whispered Jane into the basket, unless you say it's all right. The Psammead ought to have been touched by this proof of confidence. Perhaps, however, it looked upon it as a proof of doubt, for it merely snarled, "If you don't go now, I'll never help you again." Like I said before, I think he's helping them because he's got something to gain from this particular series of adventures. We'll find out. If you don't go now, I'll never help you again." "Oh," whispered Anthea. "Dear Jane, don't. Think of father and mother and all of us getting our heart's desire, and we can go back any minute. Come on." "Besides," said Cyril in a low voice, "the Psammead must know there's no danger or it wouldn't go. It's not so over and above brave itself. Come on." This Jane at last consented to do. As they got nearer to the brownie fence, they saw that it was a great hedge about 8 feet high, made of piled up thorn bushes. Now that I'm aware of. Yes, I have seen pictures of these. "What's that for?" asked Cyril. To keep out foes and wild beasts," said the girl. "I should think it ought to, too," said he. "Why, some of the thorns are as long as my foot." There was an opening in the hedge, and they followed the girl through it. A little way further on was another hedge, not so high, also of dry thorn bushes, very prickly and spiteful looking, and within this a sort of village of huts. There were no gardens and no roads, just huts. Ooh, someone outside is mowing a lawn, and that just sounded like their lawnmower went pop. I don't know. And then I heard whoever it was go, "Ooh." I don't know if it came through my microphone. Anyway, that was distracting. And within this was a sort of village of huts. There were no gardens and no roads, just huts built of wood and twigs and clay and roofed with great palm leaves dumped down anywhere. The doors of these houses were very low, like the doors of dog kennels. The ground between them was not paths or streets, but just yellow sand, trampled very hard and smooth. In the middle of the village there was a hedge that enclosed what seemed to be a piece of ground about as big as their own garden in Camden Town. So the street that they live on at the moment with Nurse is a real street. That's why I've got this picture behind me. And Camden Town is a real place, a real suburb in London. No sooner were the children well within the inner thorn hedge than dozens of men and women and children came crowding around from behind and inside the huts. The girl stood protectingly in front of the four children and said, "They are wonder children from beyond the desert. They bring marvellous gifts, and I have said that it is peace between us and them." She held out her arm with the Lowther Arcade bangle on it. Now, I'm guessing that Lowther Arcade was a real place where they had lots of different little shops and stalls at the time that the author wrote, or maybe when she was a child. So you can look that up. Lowther, Lowther, Arcade. See if it's a real place or was a real place. I'm always intrigued because so often as authors we put things into a story from our own background. Little details, it helps to make things more real. Anyway, she held out her arm with the Lowther Arcade bangle on it. The children from London I'm just trying to, sometimes these will have an error in the way it's written, so it's a little hard to actually catch the flow of the sentence. And so I go silent because I'm trying to pre-read the sentence. That's about all I ever pre-read is the sentence that I'm doing. And I'm trying to catch what this is saying so I can get the emphasis right. Okay, right, got it. We can carry on. The children from London, where nothing now surprises anyone, had never before seen so many people look so astonished. They crowded round the children, touching their clothes, their shoes, the buttons on the boys' jackets, and the coral of the girls' necklaces. "Do say something," whispered Anthea. "We come," said Cyril, with some dim remembrance of a dreadful day when he had had to wait in an outer office while his father interviewed a solicitor, and there had been nothing to read but the Daily Telegraph. "We come from the world where the sun never sets, and peace with honour is what we want. We are the great Anglo-Saxon or conquering race. Not that we want to conquer you," he added hastily. "We only want to look at your houses and at all you've got here, and then we shall return to our own place and tell of all that we have seen, so that your name may be famed." The place where the sun never sets, that's the British Empire, because at that time it went right round the world. So wherever you were, there was always the sun, even if it was night time in England, the sun was always shining on some part of the British Empire. So that's what that was referenced to. And it's obviously from some piece of expansionist empire-focused writing that he had read in the newspaper, which is probably the paper that his dad worked for. Maybe why he was reporting over in Manchuria. Anyway, Cyril's speech didn't keep the crowd from pressing around and looking as eagerly as ever at the clothing of the children. "Anthea." "Hi, Winter, good to see you here. Good to have you here." I'm just going to give you a shout out so the others can find out a bit more about yet another Codex member. Yay, it worked. Good. Sorry. I'm still used to doing shout outs, and so it's so exciting for me when I can type something in, even though I have to concentrate to get the spelling right, and it works. I love technology when it works. Very frustrating when it doesn't. Anyway, so Winter Muting, the user who you've just seen with the link there, is another one of the Codex readers. So, yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only person who has that happening. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of us who are like that, actually, especially those of us who don't just do high intensity games with lots of high tech equipment as part of the game. We tend to be a little bit more doing a really wide spread of stuff, and so therefore it's like, okay, now I've got to do this, and it's not really my field of expertise, and let's hope it's going to work. Anyway, so yeah, lots of excitement. So Winter Muting's another one of the readers with Codex, and you will, in addition to the link that I have just put in the chat for those of you who are watching live on Twitch, for the rest of you who are watching the recording with the chat turned off, or over on YouTube, come to my Twitch channel to find this link, because I haven't yet got it over there. Below the video window, or else on my About page, you will find a panel there that talks all about Codex. It's a bunch of people who read public domain books. And it's great because there's so many books that are public domain, because people have been writing books for hundreds of years and they're no longer within copyright, but people are not even aware that they still exist. And so my specialty is reading children's books. They are old children's books, and a lot of them that I've read so far are books that I read when I was a child, and my parents read, and my grandparents read. I actually read physical copies of books that my grandparents had read, probably even my great-grandparents, I'm not sure. Anyway, but there are others who read children's books and adults' books. There are others who read adults' books, and they also play games. There's such a wide variety of us. I'm trying to think of how many of us there are now. It's over a dozen. Might be 1.5 dozen people. And if you are used to non-English terms, you can look that one up. Dozen, if it's not a word that you know. Anyway, so yeah, we can all learn Twitch together slowly, but we're getting there. So I'll carry on, but it's so good to have you here. Great. It's fantastic. And yeah, if Winter is streaming after I've finished, please go over to their channel and have a listen there. If one of the others is streaming, go and join them once I've finished reading. Unless you really, really, really prefer what the others are doing instead of what I'm doing, in which case, off you go. Bye. We'll see you another time. But yeah, I don't tend to do hosting just because the nature of what I read, I get a lot of grandparents and grandchildren, young grandchildren, watching my streams. Not always at the same time. Often it will be after, but therefore, because a lot of my friends and other people who I would like to host also stream some more adult-focused games, I'm not quite happy to specifically host those on my channel, but I'm happy for you to go and visit them. So that's why I've got the links down below. So, oh, great. Good to hear. So I'm going to carry on reading, and then once I've finished, I'm going to send you all off to go and find who you want to go and listen to. And hopefully you'll find something that really fits what you're after. So here we go. Just trying to remember where I got up to. Right, here it is. I found it. So Cyril's speech didn't keep the crowd from pressing round and looking as eagerly as ever at the clothing of the children. Anthea had an idea that these people had never seen woven stuff before. Yeah. Yes, tea. Get yourself either tea dinner or tea afternoon tea, tea drink. All of those options. English is fun. Anthea had an idea that these people had never seen woven stuff before, and she saw how wonderful and strange it must seem to people who had never had any clothes but the skin of beasts. The sewing, too, of modern clothes seemed to astonish them very much. Sorry, I've got my hiccups going on now. They must have been able to sew themselves, by the way, for men who seemed to be the chiefs wore knickerbockers of goat skin or deer skin fastened round the waist with twisted strips of hide, and the women wore long skimpy skirts of animal skins. The people were not very tall, their hair was fair. I told you before that this happens. I will be halfway through a sentence and I'll get lost, and it's just happened. The people were not very tall, their hair was fair, and men and women both had it short. Their eyes were blue, and that seemed odd in Egypt. Most of them were tattooed like sailors, only more roughly. "What is this? What is this?" they kept asking, touching the children's clothes curiously. Anthea hastily took off Jane's frilly lace collar and handed it to the woman who seemed most friendly. "Take this," she said, "and look at it, and leave us alone. We want to talk among ourselves." She's getting a little bit more bold than she used to be. I'm going to give you a picture here. There you go. That there is the lace collar, and the caption on that, I'm looking at my other monitor because I've got the pictures up there. The crowd paused a dozen yards away to look at the lace collar, which I've nearly got to in the text. But you can have a look at that while I'm... This is the roof of their huts, where it talked about how it was just leaves piled on top of them. There would have been a little bit more system to it than that. Having visited many people in bush huts in the islands, they look like it's just a pile of leaves. They're actually woven together and tied together so when the storms come through, they don't fall apart. Yeah, it's quite a technique, just not one that we have. She spoke in the tone of authority which she had always found successful when she had not time to coax her baby brother to do as he was told. The tone was just as successful now. The children were left together and the crowd retreated. It paused a dozen yards away to look at the lace collar and to go on talking as hard as it could. The children will never know what those people said, though they knew well enough that they, the four strangers, were the subject of the talk. They tried to comfort themselves by remembering the girl's promise of friendliness, but of course the thought of the charm was more comfortable than anything else. They sat down on the sand in the shadow of the hedged round place in the middle of the village, and now for the first time they were able to look about them and see something more than a crowd of eager, curious faces. They here noticed that the women wore necklaces made of beads of different coloured stone. Ooh. And from these hung pendants of odd, strange shapes, and some of them had bracelets of ivory and flint. "I say," said Robert, "what a lot we could teach them if we stayed here." "I expect they could teach us something too," said Cyril. This is where you see that our author knew the current mind of society, which is that what they deemed savages were lesser than themselves. We, the great white men, could teach them so much, and yet also had a different attitude herself, because through the mouth of Cyril, she has said that they could teach us a lot too. And that is something that we need to recognise, that when someone is different from us, doesn't mean they are less than us. We need to treat them on the same level as ourselves. Language, culture, intellectual ability, we need to treat others at the same level as ourselves. And so this author, from when this book was published, which is 1906, she's schooling her society. Yeah, let's get on with it. I expect they could teach us something too, said Cyril. Did you notice that flint bracelet the woman had that Anthea gave the collar to? That must have taken some making. Look here, they'll get suspicious if we talk among ourselves. I do want to know about how they do things. Let's get the girl to show us round, and we can be thinking about how to get the amulet at the same time. Now, they haven't yet found it, so I'm not quite sure why they think they can get it, but we'll see. I'm sure the story will tell us. Anthea, get the amulet at the same time. Only mind, we must keep together, because they can't have some of them going back and others not. Anthea beckoned to the girl, who was standing a little way off, looking wistfully at them, and she came gladly. Tell us how you make the bracelets, the stone ones, said Cyril. With other stones, said the girl. The men make them. We have men of special skill in such work. Haven't you any iron tools? Iron, said the girl. I don't know what you mean. It was the first word she had not understood. Are all your tools of flint? Asked Cyril. Of course, said the girl, opening her eyes wide. I wish I had time to tell you of that talk. The English children wanted to hear all about this new place, but they also wanted to tell of their own country. It was like when you come back from your holidays and you want to hear and to tell everything at the same time. As the talk went on, there were more and more words that the girl could not understand, and the children soon gave up the attempt to explain to her what their own country was like, when they began to see how very few of the things they had always thought they could not do without were really not at all necessary to life. Sorry. The girl showed them how the huts were made. Indeed, as one was being made that very day, she took them to look at it. The way of building was very different from ours. The men stuck long pieces of wood into a piece of ground the size of the hut they wanted to make. These were about 8 inches apart, the sticks, which is about that much apart, I think. These were about 8 inches apart. Then they put in another row about 8 inches away from the first, and then a third row still further out. So they're like drawing circles with these sticks. Then all the space between was filled up with small branches and twigs, and then daubed over with black mud, worked with the feet till it was soft and sticky like putty. So they'd worked the mud first and then put it up on the walls as a plaster. The girl told them how the men went hunting with flint spears and arrows, and how they made boats with reeds and clay. Then she explained the reed thing in the river that she had taken the fish out of. It was a fish trap, just a ring of reeds set up in the water with only one little opening in it. And in this opening, just below the water, were stuck reeds slanting the way of the river's flow, so that the fish, when they had swum sillily couldn't get back out again. So basically it's a ring like this with like a funnel shape, and the fish swim in because it just gets narrower and narrower, and it's easy to follow that shape, but you don't come at a narrow space that has sharp things pointing at you as an animal, and so therefore it couldn't get out. The Maori have had fish traps like that, so did a lot of the islanders, although theirs were often long, semi-cylindrical with the ends pointing inwards like these funnels. Sorry, just getting comfortable on the seat and trying to stop it rolling backwards. Trying to find it. The fish sillily couldn't get out again. She showed them the clay pots and jars and platters, some of them ornamented with black and red patterns, and the most wonderful things made of flint and different sorts of stone, beads and ornaments and tools and weapons of all sorts and kinds. "It is really wonderful," said Cyril patronisingly, "when you consider that it's all 8,000 years ago." "I don't understand you," said the girl. "It isn't 8,000 years ago," whispered Jane. "It's now, and that's just what I don't like about it. I say, do let's go home again before anything more happens." So Jane's understood the concept of the girl is living in this time and space. But Jane's not comfortable with it because it's not home. "Do let's go home again before anything more happens. You can see for yourselves that the charm isn't here." "What's in that place in the middle?" asked Anthea, struck by a sudden thought, and pointing to the fence. "That's the secret sacred place." "Secret sacred place," said the girl in a whisper. "No one knows what is there. There are many walls, and inside the insidest one, it is. But no one knows what it is except the headsman." "I believe you know," said Cyril, looking at her very hard. "I'll give you this if you'll tell me," said Anthea, taking off a bead ring which had already been much admired. "Yes," said the girl, catching eagerly at the ring. "My father is one of the heads, and I know a water charm to make him talk in his sleep. And he has spoken. I will tell you, but if they know I have told you, they will kill me. In the insidest inside there is a stone box, and in it there is the amulet. No one knows whence it came. It came from very far away." "Have you seen it?" asked Anthea. The girl nodded. "Is it anything like this?" asked Jane, rashly producing the charm. The girl's face turned a sickly greenish white. Hide it," she whispered. "You must put it back. If they see it, they will kill us all. You for taking it, and me for knowing that there was such a thing. Oh, woe, woe, why did you ever come here?" "Don't be frightened," said Cyril. "They shan't know, Jane." "They shan't know. Jane, don't you be such a little jackape again. That's all. You see what will happen if you do. Now, tell me." He turned to the girl, but before he had time to speak the question, there was a loud shout, and a man bounded in through the opening in the thorn hedge. "Many foes are upon us," he cried. "Make ready the defences." His breath only served for that, and he lay panting on the ground. "Oh, do let's go home," said Jane. "Look here, I don't care. I will." She held up the charm. Fortunately, all the strange fair people were too busy to notice her. She held up the charm, and nothing happened. "You haven't said the word of power," said Anthea. Jane hastily said it, and still nothing happened. "Hold it up towards the east, you silly," said Robert. "Which is the east?" said Jane, dancing about in her agony of terror. Nobody knew. So they opened the fish bag to ask the Psammead, and the bag had only a waterproof sheet in it. The Psammead was gone. "Hide the sacred thing, hide it," whispered the girl. Cyril shrugged his shoulders and tried to look as brave as he knew he ought to feel. "Hide it up, puss." That's the nickname for Jane. He said, "We are in for it now. We've just got to stay and see it out." "Oh dear, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Oh my goodness me. Ooh, I hope nobody else has seen that yet and they still don't see it. I wonder if this is the opportunity. No, not opportunity. I wonder if this is... Remember in the previous chapter, or one of the previous chapters, it talked about the other half of the amulet having been crushed. No, having been broken, and it had become dust in the children's own time period. And I'm wondering if it's because of something that happens with these other people attacking them. How about we read on to the next chapter and find out? The Story of the Amulet, Chapter 5. The Fight in the Village. Here was a horrible position for English children whose proper date was AD 1905, because it was written in the time period when I was a kid it was still AD. Now it's CE, Common Era, or BCE, which is before Common Era. So AD is the equivalent of CE. So whose proper date was AD 1905, when the year before the book was published, and whose proper address was London, set down in Egypt in the year 6000 BC, which with no means whatever of getting back into their own time and place. They could not find the East, and the sun was of no use at the moment because some officious person, someone high up and with lots of words, had once explained to Cyril that the sun did not really set in the west at all, nor rise in the east either for that matter, just in that general direction, not accurately that place. The Samoyed had crept out of the bass bag. It was a bag for transporting bass fish. Okay? I don't know why they have a bag specially for transporting this particular type of fish, but that's the bag they have for transporting the Samoyed in. And they keep referring to it as the bass bag. So we're going to carry on reading. The Samoyed had crept out of the bass bag when they were not looking and had basely deserted them. I think she's having a play with the words there. An enemy was approaching. There would be a fight. People get killed in fights, and the idea of taking part in a fight was one that did not appeal to the children. The man who had brought the news of the enemy still lay panting on the sand. His tongue was hanging out long and red like a dog's. The people of the village were hurriedly filling the gaps in the fence with thorn bushes from the heap that seemed to have been piled there ready for just such a need. They lifted the cluster thorns with long poles, much as men at home nowadays lift hay with a fork. A hay fork. Yes, because they used to do things by hand in the time that this was written. So like a pitchfork, hay fork. Look up an old homemade, traditionally made one. They were made out of a branch of a tree which had a fork in it and then trimmed and sharpened. So, and then later on they had ones that had a metal end on them. Jane bit her lip and tried to decide not to cry. Robert felt in his pocket for a toy pistol and loaded it with a pink paper cap. One of those, you hit it and it goes bang. Caps, cap gun. He's got a cap gun. We had them when I was a kid. I don't know if you know what they are. Are you old enough to have had them? Do they still have them? Write it in the chat. Cap guns, are they still a thing? It was his only weapon. Cyril tightened his belt, 2 holes, and Anthea absently took the drooping red roses from the buttonholes of the others, bit the ends of the stalks and set them in a pot of water that stood in the shadow of a hut door. She was always rather silly about flowers, so what she's done by biting the end of the stem was to actually just break it open a little bit, so these flowers that are starting to droop in the heat can actually more readily take up a lot more water. Look here, she said, I think perhaps the Samoyed is really arranging something for us. I don't believe it would go away and leave us all alone in the past. I'm certain it wouldn't. Jane succeeded in deciding not to cry, at any rate yet. But what can we do? Robert asked. Nothing, Cyril answered promptly, except keep our eyes and ears open. Look, that runner chap's getting his wind. Let's go and hear what he's got to say. The runner had risen to his knees and was sitting back on his heels. Now he stood up and spoke. He began by some respectful remarks addressed to the heads of the village. His speech got more interesting when he said, I went out in my raft to snare ibises, they're a type of bird, and I had gone up the stream an hour's journey. Then I set my snares and waited, and I heard the sound of many wings and looking up, saw many herons circling in the air, and I saw that they were afraid. So I thought, a beast may scare one heron, coming upon it suddenly, but no beast will scare a whole flock of herons. And still they flew and circled and would not light. That's landing. So then I knew that what scared the herons must be men, and men who knew not our ways of going softly so as to take the birds and beasts unawares, hunting them, By this I knew that they were not of our race or of our place. So leaving my raft, I crept along the river bank, and at last came upon the strangers. They are many as the sands of the desert, and their spearheads shine red like the sun. They are a terrible people, and their march is towards us. Having seen this, I ran, and did not stay till I was before you. These are your folk, said the headman, turning suddenly and angrily on Cyril. You came as spies for them. We did not, said Cyril indignantly. We wouldn't be spies for anything. I'm certain these people aren't a bit like us. Are they now? He asked the runner. No, was the answer. These men's faces... Sorry, just checking something. Yep, that's all right. These men's faces, trying to find it, were darkened and their hair black as night. Yet these strange children, maybe, are their gods who have come before to make ready the way for them. A murmur ran through the crowd. No, no, said Cyril again. We are on your side. We will help you to guard your sacred things. The headman seemed impressed by the fact that Cyril knew that there were sacred things to be guarded. He stood a moment, gazing at the children. Then he said, It is well, and now let all make offering, that we may be strong in battle. The crowd dispersed, and 9 men, wearing antelope skins, grouped themselves in front of the opening in the hedge in the middle of the village. And presently, one by one, the men brought all sorts of things: hippopotamus flesh, ostrich feathers, the fruit of the date palms, red chalk, green chalk, fish from the river, and ibex from the mountains. Ibex is a type of goat. Ibis is a bird. Ibex is a type of goat-like animal. I can't remember which one I read before, sorry. And the headman received these gifts. There was another hedge inside the first, about a yard from it, so that there was a lane between the 2 hedges. And every now and then one of the headmen would disappear along this lane with full hands, and come back with hands empty. They are making offerings to their amulet, said Anthea. We'd better give something too. The pockets of the party, hastily explored, yielded a piece of pink tape, a bit of sealing wax, and part of the Waterbury watch that Robert had not been able to help taking to pieces at Christmas, and had never had time to rearrange. Most boys have a watch in this condition. They presented their offerings, and Anthea added the red roses. The headman, who took the things, looked at them with awe, especially at the red roses and the Waterbury watch fragment. This is a day of very wondrous happenings, he said. I have no more room in me to be astonished. Sorry. Our maiden said there was peace between you and us, but for this coming of a foe we should have made sure. The children shuddered. Now speak, are you upon our side? Yes, don't I keep telling you we are? Robert said. Look here, I will give you a sign. You see this? He held out the toy pistol. I shall speak to it, and if it answers me, you will know that I and the others are come to guard your sacred thing, and that we have just made the offerings to. Will the God whose image you hold in your hand speak to you alone, or shall I also hear it? Asked the man cautiously. That's a very wise question. You'll be surprised when you do hear it, said Robert. Now then. He looked at the pistol and said, If we are to guard the sacred treasure within, he pointed to the hedged-in space, speak with thy loud voice, and we shall obey. He pulled the trigger, and the cap went off. The noise was loud, for it was a 2-shilling pistol, and the caps were excellent. Every man, woman, and child in the village fell on its face on the sand. The head man who had accepted the test rose first. Oh, there's a picture I was meant to give you. Sorry, that was the man who came running into the village. I'll give it to you while I figure out where I'm up to on the page. That one there. So this is him running in through the gap in the hedge, and these are the villagers watching him as he comes running in. A man bounded in through the opening in the thorn hedge. So I'm going to pop that one away again and carry on reading. The head man who had accepted the test rose first. The voice has spoken, he said. Lead them into the anteroom of the sacred thing. So now the 4 children were led in through the opening of the hedge and round the lane till they came to an opening in the inner hedge. Sorry, I'm just getting the next picture ready because I happen to know it's coming up. The opening in the inner hedge, and they went through an opening in that, and so passed into another lane. The thing was built something like this, and all the hedges were of brushwood and thorns. So they went in through the first one and went round, one way or the other, round the lane, and now they're in the second one. That's a very sensible way of doing it. So this doorway here is opposite this one. So you can't just go straight through to the middle, which is probably like a hut with a roof on it or something like that. It's like the maze at Hampton Court, whispered Anthea. The lanes were all open to the sky, but the little hut in the middle of the maze was round-roofed, and a curtain of skins hung over the doorway. Here you may wait, said their guide, but do not dare pass the curtain. He himself passed in and disappeared. But look here, whispered Cyril, some of us ought to be outside in case the Samiad turns up. Don't let's get separated from each other, whatever we do, said Anthea. It's quite bad enough to be separated from the Samiad. We can't do anything while that man is in there. Let's all go back out to the village again. We can come back later now that we know the way in. That man'll have to fight like the rest, most likely, if it comes to fighting. If we find the Samiad, we'll go straight home. It must be getting late, and I don't much like this mazy place that's like full of mazes. I'm thinking that the Samiad's actually already in there. Maybe the Samiad is actually in the hut. We'll carry on reading and find out. Ooh. They went out and told the head man that they would protect the treasure when the fighting began, and now they looked about them and were able to see exactly how a first-class worker in flint, flakes and notches an arrowhead, or the edge of an axe, an advantage which no other person now alive has ever enjoyed. This is not to negate what she's just said, but it's just adding extra information. I sometimes, if I can't sleep, sometimes I will watch Time Team on YouTube. It was a program that was on TV. Actually, they've revived it on TV in England. It's an archaeology program, and they have 3 days in which to explore an area where the locals have found some indication that they think that there's something historic underneath, usually quite old. Not just reasonably recently, but actually quite old. One of the guys in their team, because each of there's a whole bunch of archaeologists, and they have all sorts of skills. Yes, they use trowels and brushes, but they also use shovels and diggers and things like that if they need to, like taking the grass off the top. But one of the guys has a specialty in I'm not sure why, but he has a specialty in flint knapping. Now, knap, K-N-A-P. Flint knapping, K-N-A-P-P-I-N-G, is where you take 2 pieces of flint and you hit one against the other with the right technique, and it cracks across and a piece flakes away. And you work with the shape that the flint forms as the pieces come off it. And a really good flint knapper will know how to produce a shape that can be used as a knife or an arrowhead or an axe. How skinny they need to get it, like this, as a blade, or how fat they need to get it so that it's still strong enough to be able to use to cut down a tree. And this chap, as you are watching on the program, he is demonstrating to one of the others, because they find flakes from where flint has been napped, these little wee bits that break off the edge. Sometimes they will actually find a piece, like that one of the times they found a piece that was an axe head that had actually cracked and so therefore had been thrown away. And so he's explaining to one of the others how it works, because it's their excuse for explaining it to us. And then he takes flint and he actually starts making a flint axe. And he also picks up one of the pieces he's broken off that has two, because flint, when you first find it, has like a coating on the outside that's hard rock, but it's a coating that's similar to the chalk stone that it was inside. It's probably chalk coating it. But then when they actually nap it, you get this layer of stuff that's not quite shiny, but it's very hard. And so you'll get pieces where the back edge of it may actually still have that white coating on it, but the rest of it is just flint. It doesn't have any of this outer stuff. And so he took up a piece that he had napped off the axe head, and demonstrated how, because it was the right shape, how you could actually use it as a knife. And then later on they actually had some meat there, and that somebody had done some hunting with. And so he was using this flint knife to cut the skin off the meat that they were going to use. And one of the others had to be very careful that they didn't cut their finger on it, because it's surprisingly sharp. And then he also used a flint axe to cut down, not a big tree, but still, if you try to do it with just a lump of rock, it's going to take you a very long time, because you're going to have to pulverize the tree trunk. But doing it with this flint axe, he was actually able to cut it down, and it cut surprisingly well. And so these children, and also I think a lot of the people who've developed these skills, such as this guy here, it's because as an archaeologist, they keep finding these remnants and then investigating how do they produce these. And a lot of that has gone into the colouring of the way this is described, for the children actually seeing someone using tools that they had created with flint by people who would have originally been making them for their own use, not as a modern recreation. So now finding where I got to on the page. Now they looked about them and were able to see exactly how a first-class worker in flint flakes and notches, no, a first-class worker in flint, flakes and notches, an arrowhead, or the edge of an axe, an advantage which no other person now alive has ever enjoyed. The boys found the weapons most interesting. The arrowheads were not on arrows such as you would shoot from a bow, but on javelins for throwing from the hand. The chief weapon was a stone fastened to a rather short stick, something like the things gentlemen used to carry about and call life preservers in the days of the garrotters. The garrotters were people who went around garrotting people as a way of killing them so they could steal from them. A garrote is a cord used to choke somebody, but it kind of cuts in. Not nice. Okay, so these guys, there were men who, when this was a very popular among a certain type of criminal going around with garrotes, these guys had a cudgel, so to speak, like a club, a short length of something with a weighted end and something that was small enough at the other end that you could hold on to it and it wouldn't break easily. So that's what they were using. And so it reminded the boys of that sort of stuff. The boys, the chief weapon was a stone fastened to a rather short stick, something like the things gentlemen used to carry about and call life preservers in the days of the garrotters. There were long things like spears or lances with flint knives, horribly sharp, and flint battle axes. Everyone in the village was so busy that the place was like an ant heap when you have walked into it by accident. The women were busy, and even the children. Quite suddenly all the air seemed to glow, and glow red. It was like the sudden opening of a furnace door such as you may see at Woolwich Arsenal if you've ever had the luck to be taken there, and then almost as suddenly it was as though the furnace doors had been shut, for the sun had set, and it was night. The sun had that abrupt way of setting in Egypt 8,000 years ago, and I believe it has never been able to break itself of the habit, and sets in exactly the same manner to the present day. The girl brought the skins of wild deer and led the children to a heap of dry sedge. Sedge is like a type of rushes. My father says they will not attack yet. Sleep, she said, and it really seemed a good idea. You may think that in the midst of all these dangers the children would not have been able to sleep, but somehow, though they were rather frightened now and then, the feeling was growing in them, deep down and almost hidden away, but still growing, that the Psammead was to be trusted, and that they were really and truly safe. This did not prevent their being quite as much frightened as they could bear to be without being perfectly miserable. "I suppose we'd better go to sleep," said Robert. "I don't know what on earth poor old nurse will do with us out all night. Set the police on our tracks, I expect. I only wish they would find us. They could find us. A dozen policemen would be rather welcome just now, but it's no use getting into a stew over it," he added soothingly. "Good night." And they all fell asleep. They were awakened by long, loud, terrible sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once, horrible, threatening shouts and shrieks and howls that sounded, as Cyril said later, like the voices of men thirsting for their enemy's blood. Probably was. "It is the voice of the strange men," said the girl, coming to them, trembling through the dark. "They have attacked the walls, and the thorns have driven them back. My father says they will not try again till daylight, but they are shouting to frighten us, as though we were savages. Dwellers in the swamps," she cried indignantly. All night the terrible noise went on, but when the sun rose, as abruptly as he had set, the sound suddenly ceased. The children had hardly time to be glad of this before a shower of javelins came hurtling over the great thorn hedge, and everyone sheltered behind the huts. But the next moment another shower of weapons came from the opposite side, and the crowd rushed to the other shelter. Cyril pulled out a javelin that had stuck in the roof of the hut beside him. Its head was of brightly burnished copper. So we've been dealing with Stone Age people. Then I think you get the Bronze Age people, which is where people were metal workers. Then the sound of shouting rose again, and the crackle of dried thorns. The enemy was breaking down the hedge. All the villagers swarmed to the point where the crackling and the shouting came. They hurled stones over the hedges and short arrows with flint heads. The children had never before seen men with the fighting light in their eyes. It was very strange and terrible, and gave you a queer, thick feeling in your throat. It was quite different from the pictures of fights in the illustrated papers at home. Illustrated papers were like, not a comic, but back in the days before doing photographs and stuff in newspapers, they would put illustrations that were like etchings, like the one I showed you in the book before, to depict something. And so some of the newspapers would have illustrated, specifically have an illustrated issue or an illustrated section, and so they were often referred to as the illustrated papers. That was the papers that you would go and buy so that you could find out what was going on, where you could look at pictures that would depict the events that were in the particular news that they were talking about. It seemed that the shower of stones had driven back the besiegers. The besieged drew breath, but at that moment the shouting and the crackling arose on the opposite side of the village, and the crowd hastened to defend that point, and so the fight swayed to and fro across the village, for the besieged had not the sense to divide their forces as their enemies had done. Cyril noticed that every now and then certain of the fighting men would enter the maze and come out with brighter faces, a braver aspect, and a more upright carriage. "I believe they go and touch the amulet," he said. "You know the Psammead said it could make people brave." They crept through the maze, and watching they saw that Cyril was right. A headman was standing in front of the skin curtain, and as the warriors came before him, he murmured a word they could not hear, and touched their foreheads with something that they could not see, and this something he held in his hands, and through his fingers they saw the gleam of a red stone. That they knew. The fight raged across the thorn hedge outside. Suddenly there was a loud and bitter cry. "They're in! They're in! The hedge is down!" The headman disappeared behind the deerskin curtain. "He's gone to hide it," said Anthea. "Oh, Sammyad dear, how could you leave us?" Suddenly there was a shriek from inside the hut, and the headman staggered out, white with fear, and fled out through the maze. The children were as white as he. "Oh, what is it? What is it?" moaned Anthea. "Oh, Sammyad, how could you? How could you?" And the sound of the fight sank breathlessly and swelled fiercely all around. It was like the rising and falling of the waves of the sea. Anthea shuddered and said again, "Oh, Sammyad, Sammyad." "Well," said a brisk voice, and the curtain of skins was lifted at one corner by a furry hand, and out peeped the bat's ears and the snail's eyes of the Sammyad. Anthea caught it in her arms, and a sigh of desperate relief was breathed by each of the four. "Oh, which is the east?" said Anthea, and she spoke hurriedly, for the noise of the wild fighting drew nearer and nearer. "Don't choke me," said the Sammyad. "Come inside." The inside of the hut was pitch dark. "I've got a match," said Cyril, and struck it. The floor of the hut was of soft, loose sand. "I've been asleep here," said the Sammyad. "Most comfortable it's been. The best sand I've had for a month. It's all right. Everything's all right. I knew your only chance would be while the fight was going on. That man won't come back. I bit him, and he thinks I'm an evil spirit. Now, you've only got to take the thing and go." The hut was hung with skins. Heaped in the middle were the offerings that had been given the night before, Anthea's roses fading on the top of the heap. At one side of the hut stood a large square stone block, and on it an oblong box of earthenware with strange figures of men and beasts on it. "Is the thing in there?" asked Cyril, as the Sammyad pointed a skinny finger at it. "You must judge of that," said the Sammyad. "The man was just going to bury the box in the sand when I jumped out at him and bit him." "Light another match, Robert," said Anthea. "Now then, quick, which is the east?" "Why, where the sun rises, of course." "But someone told us—" "Oh, they'll tell you anything," said the Sammyad impatiently, getting into its bass bag and wrapping itself in its waterproof sheet. "But we can't see the sun in here, and it isn't rising anyhow." "How you do waste time," said the Sammyad. "Why, the east's where the shrine is, of course. There." It pointed to the great stone, and still the shouting and the clash of stone on metal sounded nearer and nearer. The children could hear that the headmen had surrounded the hut to protect their treasure as long as might be from the enemy, but none dare to come in after the Sammyad's sudden fierce biting of the headman. "Now, Jane," said Cyril very quickly, "I'll take the amulet. You stand ready to hold up the charm, and be sure you don't let it go as you come through." He made a step forward, but at that instant a great crackling overhead ended in a blaze of sunlight. The roof had been broken in at one side, and great slabs of it were being lifted off by 2 spears. As the children trembled and winked in the new light, large, dark hands tore down the wall, and a dark face with a blobby fat nose looked over the gap. Even at that awful moment, Anthea had time to think that it was very like the face of Mr. Jacob Absalom, who had sold them the charm in the shop near Charing Cross. "Here is their amulet," cried a harsh, strange voice. "It is this that makes them strong to fight and brave to die. And what else have we here, gods or demons?" He glared fiercely at the children, and the whites of his eyes were very white indeed. He had a wet, red, copper knife in his teeth. There was not a moment to lose. "Jane, Jane, quick!" cried everyone passionately. Jane, with trembling hands, held up the charm towards the east. I've missed a bunch of pictures, sorry. Jane, with trembling hands, held up the charm towards the east, and Cyril spoke the word of power. The amulet grew to a great arch. Out beyond it was the glaring Egyptian sky, the broken wall, the cruel, dark, blobby-nosed face with the red, wet knife in its gleaming teeth. Within the arch was the dull, faint, greeny brown of London grass and trees. "Hold tight, Jane," Cyril cried, and he dashed through the arch, dragging Anthea and the Samoyed after him. Robert followed, clutching Jane, and in the ears of each as they passed through the arch of the charm, the sound and fury of battle died out suddenly and utterly, and they heard only the low, dull, discontented hum of vast London, and the seeking and patting of the sparrows on the gravel, and the voices of the ragged baby children playing ring-a-rosies on the yellow trampled grass. And the charm was a little charm again in Jane's hand, and there in the basket, with their dinner and the bath buns lying just... And there was the basket with their dinner and the bath buns lying just where they had left it. Not the bass basket. This is their lunch basket, sorry. "My hat," said Cyril, drawing a long breath. "That was something like an adventure." "It was rather like one, certainly," said the Samoyed. They all lay still, breathing in the safe, quiet air of Regent's Park. "We'd better go home at once," said Anthea presently. "Old Nurse will be most frightfully anxious. The sun looks about the same as it did when we started yesterday. We've been away 24 hours. "The buns are still quite soft," said Cyril, feeling one. "I suppose the dew kept them fresh." They were not hungry, curiously enough. They picked up the dinner basket and the Samoyed basket and went straight home. Old Nurse met them with amazement. "Well, if I ever did," she said. "What's gone wrong? You've soon tired of your picnic." The children took this to be bitter irony, which means saying the exact opposite of what you mean in order to make yourself disagreeable, as when you happen to have a dirty face and someone says, "How nice and clean you look." "We're very sorry," began Anthea, but old Nurse said, "Oh, bless me, child, I don't care. Please yourselves and you'll please me. Come in and get your dinners comfortable. I've got a potato on a boiling." When she'd gone to attend to the potatoes, the children looked at each other. Could it be that old Nurse had so changed that she no longer cared that they should have been away from home for 24 hours? All night, in fact, without any explanation whatsoever. But the Samoyed put its head out of its basket and said, "What's the matter? Don't you understand? You came back through the charm arch at the same time as you go through it. This isn't tomorrow." "Is it still yesterday?" said Jane. "No, it's today, the same as it always been. It wouldn't do to go mixing up the present and the past and cutting bits out of one to fit into the other." "Then all that adventure took no time at all?" "You can call it that if you like," said the Samoyed. "It took none of the modern time anyhow." That evening Anthea carried up a steak for the learned gentleman's dinner. She persuaded Beatrice, the maid-of-all-work who had given her the bangle with the blue stone, to let her do it, and she stayed and talked to him, by special invitation, while he ate the dinner. She told him the whole adventure, beginning with, "This afternoon we found ourselves on the bank of the River Nile," and ending up with, "And then we remembered how to get back, and there we were in Regent's Park, and it hadn't taken any time at all." She did not tell anything about the charm or the Samoyed, because that was forbidden. But the story was quite wonderful enough, even as it was, to entrance the learned gentleman. "You are a most unusual little girl," he said. "Who tells you all these things?" "No one," said Anthea. "They just happen." "Make believe," he said slowly, as one who recalls and pronounces a long-forgotten word. His childhood was a very long time ago. He sat long after she had left him. At last he roused himself with a start. "I really must take a holiday," he said. "My nerves must be all out of order. I actually have a perfectly distinct impression that the little girl from the rooms below came in and gave me a coherent and graphic picture of life as I conceive it to have been in pre-dynastic Egypt. Strange what tricks the mind will play. I shall have to be more careful." He finished his bread, conscientiously and actually went for a mile walk before he went back to his work. And that's the end of the chapter and of today's reading. That's probably good for him to go for a walk like that, because when you're walking, it stimulates your circulation, which means that you get more oxygen to your brain, which means that he'll actually be able to do his work better than he was before. And I bet he hasn't thought about that. I'm going to now show you the pictures that we missed. I'll just have to find them. I know they're here. Looking over here to what I need to find, my other monitor. This one here. So there's this one, which is captioned the story of, no, it's not. That's the name of the book. I don't know what this one's captioned, but this is the guy, I think this is the runner accusing them of being spies for the enemy who have arrived. So that's what that one was. See, they're wearing animal skins around them. And then there's this picture here. I just find it for you. And this one here is, was it Robert or Cyril who had the cap gun? And he fired his gun off and it made everyone drop to the ground and believe that their God had spoken to them and approved of the children being there. Yeah, there were quite a few pictures in that chapter. Sorry about that. I'm assuming that this is from that chapter just because they visually fit with what we've had. So here's the children. Oh, there you go. There's the Samoyed inside the hut, poking his head out. And there's the children. That's Anthea wanting to pick him up and hug him because she's delighted that he's there. He's been sleeping in the sand because he loves the sand. And so they're going to go into that hut, and that's the hut where they find the amulet. And then the last one, I think, from that chapter is this one here, where they disappear. Yes, there's the guy with the copper knife in between his teeth. The hut roof has been lifted. Oops, there's my other water bottle knocked over. Is being torn upwards. He's leaning in over the side wall of the hut, and the children are going through the archway in the amulet or whatever it is that they're meant to go through to get back to Regent's Park. So there you go. And I'm going to, once we've finished, actually go and put the captions on the rest of these pictures so I actually remember to put them in because I can see what part of the story they're for. Yeah. So, it's after 5 o'clock here now. We did well. Yeah, reading was not quite so long because I talked for so long, and I'm so sorry about that. But intriguing story, and it gets more intriguing. For those of you who didn't pick up on it earlier, one of the points that was made was that the author herself, the author of this book, had actually spent, when she was before she wrote it or while she was writing it, spent a lot of time at the British Museum researching aspects of ancient history, mainly to do with Egypt, I think, but probably also some other stuff. So she dedicated, this is the dedication on the book, to Dr. Wallace Budge of the British Museum as a small token of gratitude for his unfailing kindness and help in the making of it. Now, he may not have been an Egyptologist, but I'm guessing that we're going to have a lot of other historic references in the rest of the book. I'm not sure. But he would have been her go-to person for that at the time. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to the right page. Additional information. Next time, the chapter is called The Way to Babylon. So we're going to do another bit of time travel, I think. And I'm not quite sure what the Samoyed's got up his sleeve. Have you got any ideas? Have you got any thoughts Can you imagine anything that quite possibly the Samyad might be intending to do? Maybe he's been enjoying the adventures that the children have and want them to have some more adventures. They're not actually getting to wish at this stage. The whole motivation behind getting the other part of this amulet, although I think there's meant to be something that joins the two pieces together, the whole motivation was meant to be so that the children could wish for mother and father and the lamb, that's their youngest sibling, their youngest brother who's a toddler, or maybe slightly bigger than that now, to be able to come back home and be at home with them because they're missing them terribly. And just being able to be together again. So my thinking as an adult is, but mother still needs this rest. So I wonder if quite possibly it's going to take the duration of these holidays for them to find what they need, and so mother will in the meantime be getting all the rest she needs and then be brought home by a wish that they make. Maybe that's what happens. I don't know. Come up with your own theories. Now, just in case you are wanting to be contribute to any of the discussions about the books that I read, I do have a Discord server. Sorry, I was just trying to remember what it was called, the command. So there's my Discord server. That's for those of you who are watching live on Twitch. If you are watching this video on YouTube, then there will be a link on my profile page for my Discord server, and you're most welcome to come and join it. It's a very, very quiet server. Just about nothing happens there except for announcements when I am going live. But if you join the server, then if you happen to have Discord open, it will tell you that I've gone live, as well as Twitch doing that. But I will be putting up the illustrations for this story. At some stage, I'll put up illustrations from other stories we've already had. And if you come across any information that you think is relevant to the story we're currently reading or any of the other ones, you can contribute them in those channels of the server. And if you've got suggestions for books that you think might be fun for us to read or other things like that, put those in the chatting channel. Yeah, all that sort of stuff. So I'm about to go offline and I am going to give you the link for Codex. I spelt it correctly. Yay! That's wonderful. That's the Codex Discord, and that is so that, yes, I'm itching my ear again. It's just one of those things. Just ignore it. Codex is our group of readers. We all read online. It's not all we do, but all of us. Actually, the reason we're part of Codex is because we read public domain books on Twitch. Some of us do other things as well. A lot of us play games as well. Some of us only read for part of the year, things like that. But if you join the Discord server, you'll see when someone goes, the Codex Discord server, you'll see when someone goes live. And otherwise, if you want to go and find someone now, in my link below the live video at the moment, you will see a panel that says Codex, and it has links for all of the different Codex readers. And you can go to all of those ones and see who's live at the moment and go and listen to whatever they're reading. They will be reading something completely different to me. Get involved with their chat, follow them, subscribe, all of those things, all of those wonderful things. Now, if you happen to be a YouTube viewer, you're kind of missing out actually a little bit, because we get into chats and discussions and I wave my hands around and all sorts of stuff like that, and you're missing out on all the links that I put over in the chat box and other things that people contribute. But you get to listen to a whole story, one video straight after the other. It's like swings and roundabouts, you know, there's benefits to each. But if you're on Twitch and you want to listen to any of our previous stories, then go to the YouTube channel. Yes, that one worked. Yay. My YouTube channel has playlists for each of the books I have already read. And all of the videos that are over here on Twitch get saved and put up, just the actual video window, on YouTube in the playlists 2 weeks roughly after I have read them live on Twitch, because Twitch only saves them for 2 weeks. What else? Just trying to think if there's anything else. So on YouTube, you can subscribe, and so you'll be notified when I put up new videos. One day eventually we'll get a big enough community over there and actually have like a mini forums thing over there, comment board over there. At this stage, that's a long way off, but you can leave comments on the videos over there. On Twitch, you can leave a comment, but I'm never going to see it because if I'm not online when you leave a comment, it doesn't show. The only people who can see something when your streamer is offline on Twitch is anyone else who's actually online at the same time when that chat is being used. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of streamers use Discord, because you can carry on conversations and see something that has been said previously. Anyway, all of those things, go and check out the other Discord servers, and also go and check out the other Codex readers. And hopefully there's somebody who's live at the moment, and I'm not going to make you wait while I look, but that's okay. We'll get there. I will at some stage learn how to make sure of who is currently online, and then I'll be able to pass that information on to you, and you can go and visit them. In the meantime, no, I'm not starting doing raids just because I haven't got the brain power for that. I'm managing to use chat commands, that sort of stuff. Anyway, we're getting there, and all of that sort of cool stuff. And it's great to have you here. I've really loved having you here, listening, being part of the conversation, adding little bits and pieces, all those things. It's fabulous. It's lots of fun. I really do enjoy reading for you. And looking forward to the next time that we read together. We will find out about getting to Babylon, I guess, the way to Babylon. I suppose that means they're going to end up in Babylon. Oh, I'm going to have to dig out some pictures of Babylon for you to show you what it used to look like in the old days, I suppose. Unless there's some in the story. There might be. We'll see. I'm looking forward to that. So, between now and then, enjoy watching other streamers who are reading to you or playing games or whatever. Look forward to seeing you next time, and happy reading. Bye.